Good afternoon, and thanks for making the effort to turn up today. It certainly demonstrates that unity is strength. Apologies for the notes. I've literally just gotten back on my feet this week, so I'll see how I go. For those that don't know me, as Feathers has said, I was your Pauline Hanson's One Nation candidate for Gippsland in the 2022 federal elections. I also stood with my running mate Ray Akers in the last state election for East Gippsland. Pauline's got a motto: I've got the guts to say what you're thinking. The reason I mention this is because I'm going to say a few things today that might make a few people here uncomfortable, but our region, our state, our economy and our country are facing very difficult times ahead. If we're ever going to revive the timber industry, we need to have an honest discussion about how we got here in the first place. The results of the last two elections have shown that the majority of Gippslanders tended to vote for the so-called major parties. Okay, so let's take a moment to look at each of their scorecards to see what they've done to help or hinder the timber industry since then. In the upper house, 2 of the 5 members elected to represent the interests of our region came from the ALP. One of these 2 was even appointed to the senior government position of Minister for Regional Development, with direct access to the Premier himself. So you'd think that Gippsland industry would be absolutely booming at the moment. Couldn't be further from the truth. Victoria's regional timber industry historically used to put over $5.5 billion a year into the Victorian economy. Under Labor, this has shrunk to just over $1 billion, with approximately, now I think Mark said before $300 million, but Gary Blackwood from the Liberal Party told me it was $550 million, so make up your own mind on that. It's still a lot of money. Put $550 million of this going into East Gippsland's economy. At the end of this year, this revenue is going to fall again, this time to $0, with 5,500 jobs lost as well. So why did this happen? Most people would be unaware that the timber industry was traded off by Labor after the last election in a kind of a political swap meet. This was done to honour preference deals done prior to the elections with numerous parties, such as the Greens, to ensure Labor's return to power. In the case of the Greens, their asking price was the complete shutdown of the native timber industry.
Shame on you.
Yes, exactly. Unfortunately, in signing off on this deal, it appears that the city-based Daniel Andrews overlooked the extent of the collateral damage that would follow. Wood-dependent industries such as local papermaker Opal scaled back their operations with 250 plus jobs lost. Over a dozen large Australian construction companies have collapsed to date, with timber and other timber building materials, I should say, in short supply. The prices of these have skyrocketed. There have been 2,170 insolvency in the building industry, a 69% increase. Many wholesale and retail timber product suppliers have now closed their doors for good for the very same reason. However, and I'm sad to say this, it would be wrong to only blame Dan and the Greens for our present situation. The truth is that Dan's only been able to do the things he's done because we have a weak, ineffective opposition here in Victoria. I sometimes think that they've forgotten what it is to oppose. After all, if a coalition can't oppose while they're in opposition, how can voters expect them to govern if they're entrusted with government? Exactly. I believe that good governments come about when you have a stable, effective, well-led opposition who keep the government in check by calling them out when they underperform, or try to do things that are not in the best interest of those who elected them, like closing down regional timber industries and harvesting. The Liberal Party leadership have had 4 leadership changes since Labor took office back in 2014, and they're being distracted at the moment by internal wrangling. In recent years, there's hardly been a day gone by when the media haven't reported on yet another instance of serious government corruption, multi-million-dollar project cost blowouts, branch stacking, IBAC hearings, and the neglect of our schools, hospitals and roads by the Andrews government. A few years ago, the New South Wales Premier was sacked for not declaring a bottle of expensive wine. Yet here in Victoria, despite being handed an absolute goldmine of political ammunition, the opposition can't seem to land a blow on the Labor government. Members of the opposition will often use the excuse that they simply don't have the numbers to block legislation. However, they can still embarrass and pressure governments to the point that they partially or totally reconsider. Look what happened in July in WA this year with its new Aboriginal heritage laws. A group of private landowners objected to its confusing regulations and overreach. They got the attention of the media, they held public workshops and circulated and submitted a petition that attracted 17,000 signatures in just 1 week alone. 5 weeks later, Premier Cook announced that the Act would be repealed. So change can happen if people persist and apply pressure.
Yay! Woohoo! Woohoo!
Unfortunately, closer to home, the situation is not much better. Our elected federal member has held a very safe National Party seat at Gippsland continuously since 2008. Dan Andrews' sudden announcement of an earlier closure date for the timber industry certainly caught everyone by surprise, including many in Dan's party, I suspect. Since then, our elected member has made frequent media appearances portraying himself as the champion of the timber industry and fervently stating his opposition to this decision.
Is he here?
Yet, it was not so long ago that he was being equally passionate in urging his fellow party members to embrace the leftist policy of net zero emissions by 2050. This resulted in a number of well-documented clashes with other prominent party members who didn't agree with him. As they tried to point out, adopting net zero would result in the destruction of regional industries just like timber harvesting. Actually, when you think about it, we all knew the timber industry was going to close anyway in 2030, didn't we? And our federal representative knew this also. So where were the present levels of outrage and protest back then when Dan first locked in the 2030 closure date? If our member truly believed timber was such a vital industry, as he now makes out, the closure of Victoria's timber industry should never have been entertained in the first place, much less accepted as a done deal.
Yay! Woo!
Decisive action should have been taken back then, not now after the horse has bolted.
Truth, nothing but the truth. Yes.
To sum up, you are here today because the traditional major parties, especially the Labor Party, have failed you. Many of our politicians, like Dan Andrews, have shown that they do not have your best interests at heart, whilst others are not capable of strongly representing you and standing up to politicians like Dan. In spite of this, I remain an optimist. With commitment and the right people voted into Parliament, not seat warmers, faction favourites or career politicians, I'm confident that we can repeal this insane decision. Thank you.
Yeah!